When you think of serial killers, the names are almost always the same. Ted Bundy, Jeffrey Dahmer, Jack the Ripper, monsters hiding in plain sight. But what if I told you some of the most terrifying serial killers in history didn't look like monsters at all? They looked like your neighbor, your teacher, your sweet aunt. Today we're uncovering the chilling truth about the women who killed again and again and got away with it until it was too late. And I'm your host, Alina. Let's get into it. Some monsters are born into darkness, others marry into it. Elizabeth Bathory managed both. She came from one of the most powerful noble families in Hungary, the kind with castles, influence, and a deep vein of cruelty running through its bloodline. At 15, Elizabeth married Ferenc Nedesdy, a military man who shared her taste for violence. As a wedding gift, he gave her something a little more intimate than jewelry, a custom-built torture chamber in her new home, Castle Seed. I am love. Together they began experimenting on the young servant girls who worked in their household. At first it was said to be punishments, slaps, beatings, humiliation. But things escalated quickly. There were reports of girls being stripped, beaten until their skin split open, then coated in honey and left outside for insects to devour. Others were stuck with needles under their fingernails or had their lips sewn shut. Elizabeth seemed to take pleasure in pushing the limits of human pain. After Ferenc's death, Elizabeth's cruelty reached deeper levels. She brought in two loyal accomplices, her former nurse and a local witch. With their help, Elizabeth began abducting girls from nearby villages, mostly peasants, easy to make disappear. They were lured to the castle with promises of work. None of them came back. Victims were beaten with clubs and whips until bones shattered. Some were burned with hot irons. Others were frozen to death in the winter snows, stripped naked, drenched with cold water, and left outside to die. There were reports of her biting chunks of flesh from their bodies with her bare teeth. One account claims she forced a girl to cook and eat her own flesh. The scenes described by witnesses were less like crimes and more like rituals, sadistic, methodical, and relentless. And then there's the infamous detail that she bathed in the blood of virgins to preserve her youth and beauty. It's a striking image. A pale, noble woman soaking in a crimson tub. But it's likely a myth, one exaggerated over time. Still, when you are torturing and killing dozens, possibly hundreds of girls, it doesn't take blood baths to make the story horrifying. Her family knew, of course they knew, and they protected her year after year, as long as her victims came from the lower classes. But when Elizabeth grew bolder and began taking the daughters of local nobles, the whispers turned into accusations. Complaints reached King Matthias of Hungary. An investigation followed. Her accomplices were arrested, tried, and hanged after confessing to the murder of at least 80 girls, though the true number may have been over 600. As for Elizabeth, she was never really formally tried. Executing a countess would have tarnished the family name. So instead, they bricked her into a windowless room in her own castle. No human contact, no escape. Just stone walls and silence. She died there on August 21, 1614, alone. Elizabeth Bathory has been called the Blood Countess. Even centuries later, her crimes are still debated. Not because they might not have happened, but because the full truth is too monstrous to believe. Some say she was a political scapegoat. Others call her the most prolific female serial killer in recorded history. But one thing is certain. Behind the myths, behind the legends, was a real woman who turned cruelty into an art form. And while most killers hide in shadows, Elizabeth built herself a throne of blood and ruled from it. Some people bake to relieve stress. Leonarda Cianciulli baked to hide a murder. Actually, 3 murders. Born in Italy and raised under a cloud of superstition, Leonarda's life was steeped in tragedy. She married Rafael Pensardi in 1914 against her mother's wishes and believed she had been cursed for it. Whether or not there was a curse, her life definitely felt like one. She became pregnant 17 times. 3 of those ended in miscarriages. 10 of her children died in early childhood, and only 4 survived. Leonarda became fiercely protective of the few she had left, especially her oldest son, Giuseppe. He was her pride, her joy, her obsession. So when Giuseppe came of age and was expected to serve in the Italian army as World War II loomed, Leonarda panicked. And when you're a deeply superstitious woman who believes your life is shaped by omens, curses, and fate, you turn to the only thing that makes sense in your unraveling world: human sacrifice. In 1939, Leonarda decided the only way to save her son from death on the battlefield was to offer up a life in his place, or as it turned out, 3 lives. Her first victim was Faustina Setti, a lonely woman looking for love. Leonarda told her she'd found her husband in another town. Faustina packed her bags, wrote goodbye letters that Leonarda dictated, and visited her friend one last time. Leonarda gave her drugged wine, then killed her with an axe. She chopped Faustina's body into 9 pieces, drained the blood, and dissolved the rest in caustic soda, a lye-based chemical strong enough to melt flesh. The remains turned into a thick black sludge, which she poured into the septic tank. The blood, however, she kept. Leonarda dried it in the oven, ground it into powder, and stirred it into tea cakes. Yes, blood tea cakes. She served them to friends and ate them herself. Her second victim, Francesca Soavi, was told she'd been offered a teaching job. Same setup, same lie, same brutal end, and once again, the body was dismembered, dissolved, and baked into afternoon snacks. But it was the third victim, Virginia Casiopo, that took things to another level. Virginia had been a famous soprano, elegant, wealthy, and respected. After killing her, Leonarda noticed she had a little more substance than the others, more body fat. So she rendered it down, mixed it with perfume, and made soap. According to her later confession, the soap came out soft, creamy, and smelled pleasant. She claimed she gave it to neighbors and used it herself. Tea cakes and soap, both made from the flesh and blood of women she once called friends. It might have gone on even longer, but Virginia's sister got suspicious. She told the police Leonarda was arrested, and when confronted, she didn't just confess, she bragged. She gave vivid, unapologetic details of each murder as if she was reciting a recipe. She was sentenced to 30 years in prison and an additional 3 in a criminal asylum. Her reaction? Allegedly, she shrugged and said, "At least I saved my son." If you're curious and honestly a little brave, you can read her memoir, An Embittered Soul's Confessions, or even visit the Criminological Museum in Rome, where they kept the very pot she used to boil her victims. Leonarda Cianciulli wasn't just a killer, she was a killer with an apron, a plan, and an absolutely terrifying level of domesticity. She didn't look like a monster, she looked like someone's mother, someone's neighbor, someone's baker, and she was all of those things. Just also a cannibalistic serial killer who turned people into pastries. She thought it was a sacrifice, a spell, a recipe. But it was also a warning. Monsters don't always hide under beds. Sometimes they bake you cookies. Stick around, the oven's still warm. Also, if you haven't subscribed to my channel yet, subscribe so you don't miss my next video. Some serial killers hide in shadows. Aileen Wuornos didn't. She stood on the side of the road with her thumb out, smiling, waiting for the next driver to pull over, and stepped straight into a nightmare. Born on February 29, 1956, a leap year baby, like a cosmic glitch, Aileen Wuornos grew up in Michigan under brutal, neglectful conditions. By her teens, she was homeless, scraping by however she could. Eventually, she drifted south and landed in Florida, where she made her living as a sex worker. But in the late 1989, something snapped. Over the course of a single year, Aileen Wuornos murdered 7 men. She didn't strangle them, she didn't poison them. She shot them point blank. In some cases, multiple times. Her first known victim was Richard Mallory, an electronics store owner. His body was discovered in December 1989, riddled with bullets, dumped in the woods. He wouldn't be the last. The next body turned up nearly a year later. Each murder followed a pattern. A man picks up a woman hitchhiking and never makes it home. Don't hitchhike, people. Wuornos claimed it was self-defense. The each man tried to grab her and she fought back. Maybe that was true the first time, maybe even the second. But by victim number 7, the story had worn thin. Along the way, she met Tyria Moore in Daytona Beach in 1986. The two women became lovers, lived together, shared everything, except apparently the murders. Tyria never participated in the killings, but how much she knew is still debated. Either she turned a blind eye, or Aileen kept her completely in the dark. The case broke open in the most mundane way possible. A receipt. Wuornos had pawned items that once belonged to Richard Mallory and left behind a fingerprint. That was all it took. Police tracked her down, but by then, Tyria had already left Florida and returned to Pennsylvania. The cops found her and she agreed to help. Over the phone, with detectives listening in, Tyria gently coaxed a confession out of Aileen. She told her everything. 6 murders straight from her mouth. Cold, clear, matter of fact. Wuornos was arrested and charged. On January 27, 1992, she was found guilty of killing Richard Mallory. She pled guilty to 5 more murders in the following months. Later, she admitted to the 7th, Peter Sims, though his body was never found. For each life she took, the state gave her a death sentence. She was executed by lethal injection on October 9, 2002. Throughout her trial and imprisonment, Aileen remained volatile, paranoid, and eerily calm about her fate. She claimed she was haunted, used, betrayed. In her final interview, she stared into the camera and said she'd be back, like an avenging spirit. Her story has since been dissected in documentaries, podcasts, and true crime books, but most famously it was brought to the screen in a film, Monstrous, with Charlize Theron transforming into Wuornos so completely that it's uncomfortable to watch, which is kind of the point. Aileen Wuornos wasn't just a murderer, she was a collision of trauma, violence, and vengeance. The perfect storm. And the most terrifying part, she was the kind of killer who didn't wait for darkness. She killed in broad daylight, in plain sight, with a smile. She said she was defending herself. But 7 men are dead, and Aileen Wuornos never looked back. There are serial killers who murder out of rage. Some kill for power, others for twisted pleasure. And then there's Amelia Dyer, a woman who turned infanticide into a business model. She was a nurse, a midwife, and also one of the most prolific serial killers in British history. In Victorian England, desperation had a name: baby farming. It was a system where struggling mothers, often unwed and penniless, would pay a small fee to women who promised to care for their babies. These women were supposed to find adoptive homes or provide shelter until the mother could return. Amelia Dyer promised that. She smiled, nodded, put at the babies in her arms, and took the money. And then she killed them. At first, her method was passive. She simply let the babies die. She starved them, neglected them, let their tiny bodies waste away in cribs too small and cold to survive. But even in an era with little oversight, someone eventually noticed. Dyer was caught and given a sentence that now feels like a sick joke. 6 months in jail for baby murder. When she got out, she didn't stop. She just got smarter. No more waiting around for nature to take its course. Now she strangled the infants with white dressmaking tape, then wrapped their bodies in cloth or paper and dumped them like garbage. She operated under multiple aliases and moved constantly, leaving behind a trail of death in boarding houses, rented flats, and lonely canals. Babies were never meant to live long under her care, and they didn't. Over the course of 2 decades, Amelia Dyer is believed to have murdered over 200 babies, with some estimates reaching as high as 400. That's not just serial killing, that's industrial. The horror only stopped when the River Thames gave out one of its secrets. In 1896, the body of a baby was pulled from the water, wrapped in brown paper and tied with twine. A single name scrawled on a parcel, one of Dyer's many aliases, led investigators straight to her latest baby farm. What they found was a house of rot and grief, tiny clothed baby bottles, and beneath it all, silence. She was arrested, charged, and put on trial. Amelia didn't deny it. In fact, she all but confessed. Her casual words, "You'll know all mine by the tape around their necks." On June 10, 1896, she was hanged at Newgate Prison. When asked if she had any last words, she simply said, "I have nothing to say." Amelia Dyer didn't wear a mask or stalk her victims in the night. She held them, wrapped them, promised to care of them, then killed them for profit. She turned motherhood into murder and got away with it for years. Even now, over a century later, the sheer scale of her crimes doesn't feel real. Hundreds of infants gone, swallowed up by poverty, indifference, and one woman's bottomless cruelty. And she did it while society looked the other way. And if it weren't for one weighted bundle floating up in the Thames, she might have kept going. In the ring, she was known as La Dama del Silencio, the Silent Lady, a masked figure in a glittering costume, slamming opponents to the mat under the bright lights of lucha libre arenas in Mexico City. But outside the ring, Juana Barraza wore a different kind of disguise. She traded the mask for makeup, the cape for a stethoscope, and she became something far more terrifying than any wrestling villain. She became a killer. Juana's childhood was a horror story all its own. Her mother was an alcoholic who, in an act that's hard to even process, traded Juana to an older man in exchange for beer. From that moment on, she was trapped in a cycle of abuse and abandonment, raised in violence and raised to survive. And survive she did. First, as a professional wrestler, and then as one of Mexico's most notorious serial killers. Her victims were all elderly women, grandmothers, widows, lonely souls living in quiet apartments. Juana posed as a government social worker, claiming to help seniors apply for welfare. She carried paperwork, wore official-looking clothes, and sometimes even brought a stethoscope. She looked helpful, trustworthy, and kind. Then she would strike. Some were strangled, others were bludgeoned. Many were killed using their own belongings: a telephone cord, a scarf, a belt, even the stethoscope around their neck. Once dead, Juana would rob them, taking anything of value from the apartment before slipping away. For years, Mexico City police were baffled. Witnesses had seen someone live in the homes of the victims, but they described a figure with a stocky, muscular build, broad shoulders, a square jaw, so authorities assumed they were looking for a man dressed as a woman. They weren't. They were hunting La Dama del Silencio. Juana was finally caught in 2006, fleeing the home of Ana Maria de los Reyes, her last known victim. Ana had been strangled with a stethoscope, the same prop Juana used to gain entry. When police arrested her, they were shocked to find that she wasn't a man at all, but former wrestler turned serial killer. The tabloids exploded. The press branded her La Mataviejitas, the little old lady killer. In custody, Juana confessed to only one murder, blaming it on a lifetime of abuse and deep resentment toward her mother. But the evidence said otherwise. She was found guilty of 16 charges, including 11 counts of murder, and sentenced to 759 years in prison. She still insists she's not a monster, just a woman with a past that never let go. But the truth is this: Juana Barraza wore many masks, and when she took them off, she left behind a trail of broken bodies and silent rooms where the only sound was the ticking of a clock, waiting for someone who would never get up again. Juana Barraza didn't need superpowers. She just needed rage and a key to your front door. She wanted to be a nurse. She says she wanted to heal. But Jane Tapan didn't come to soothe pain. She came to study it. Born Honora Kelly in 1857, she didn't have much of a childhood. Her mother died of tuberculosis. Her father, a tailor by trade, lost his grip on reality. The story goes he eventually stitched his own eyelids shut. Whether that's true or not, the trauma stuck. Orphaned and alone, Honora was taken in as a servant by the Tapan family in Massachusetts. They never officially adopted her, but she took their name, reinvented herself. She wanted a better life, a respectable one, and she got it for a while. She trained as a nurse at Cambridge Hospital, where her bedside manner was described as warm, almost overly affectionate. She would sit with her patients for hours, stroking their hair, whispering in their ears, watching them slip in and out of consciousness. What her colleagues didn't know was that Jane was experimenting. She poisoned patients with a rotating cocktail of morphine and atropine, studying the effects like a scientist with lab rats. She'd bring them to the brink of death, then back again, just to see what it felt like. To her, it was power, control. As she later said, it would be a delicious thrill to hold the power of life and death in my hands. In 1895, Jane poisoned both of her landlords, and no one questioned it. In 1899, she gave a fatal dose of strychnine to her own foster sister, Elizabeth, and still, no red flags. She kept working as a private nurse, kept smiling, kept killing. But in 1901, she got bolder, sloppier, hungrier. While visiting the Davis family, Jane poisoned Mattie Davis, the matriarch. Then, like a vulture, she moved in with a grieving widower, Alden Davis. Not to help, of course, but to finish what she'd started. One by one, the family began to fall. Annie Gordon, the Davis' eldest daughter, came to Jane for help. Jane gave her a fatal injection. Then Alden Davis himself gone. Then Mary Gibbs, the youngest daughter. Within weeks, Jane had annihilated nearly the entire Davis family. But this time, people noticed. Mary's husband, suspicious and grief-stricken, demanded an autopsy. He revealed poison, plain and simple. Jane Tapan was arrested on October 26, 1901. In custody, she confessed to 31 murders, but many believe the true count was higher, dozens more, maybe even close to 100. She told investigators that her goal had been to kill more people than anyone else ever had. She said it with pride. And yet, Jane never stood trial. She was declared insane and committed to the Taunton Insane Hospital, where she spent the rest of her life. She died there in 1938, still unrepentant, still whispering secrets to herself in the dark. Jane Tapan didn't want to save lives. She wanted to own them and then snuff them out like candles, one by one. She wasn't just a murderer. She was a scientist of pain, and her favorite experiment, watching you fade. You ever meet someone who smiles just a little too much? The kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes? That was Nanny Dawes. She looked like your average sweet southern grandma. Curly hair, floral dresses, baked pies, and a body count. 10 people, maybe more, all poisoned, all by her own hand. Let's start at the beginning because it gets wild fast. Nanny married her first husband, Charles Braggs, when she was just 16. They had 4 kids, but soon after, 2 of those children mysteriously died. Doctors called it a stomach bug. Nanny cried, Braggs got real uncomfortable, and honestly, good instinct. He packed up with the one surviving child and left. Smart move. He's the only husband who survived being married to her. Her next victim, her own grandson. The poor kid came to visit in 1945 and died 3 days later. No warning, just gone. The milk bottle he drank from, later suspected to be laced with arsenic. That's one way to end a visit to grandma's house. Not long after that, husband number 2, Frank Harrelson, got sick and died within a week. Same year, that's 2 family members dead. Just poof, within months. You'd think someone would have noticed something. But Nanny, she played the grieving widow like it was her full-time job. Then came the 1950s. Nanny wasn't her prime. And by prime, I mean the bodies started stacking up like she was collecting stamps. Husband number 3, Early Lennon, died in 1952. Then in 1953, she took out her own mother, 2 of her sisters, and husband number 4, Richard Morton, all poisoned. All while Nanny smiled sweetly and offered tea. It's like she looked at her family tree and thought, needs pruning. And then came the finale. Husband number 5, Samuel Dawes. Now, Samuel was a nice guy. Boring, yes. He didn't like Nanny reading the romance novels. And he definitely didn't like her going out too much. Nanny didn't appreciate that. So she slipped him a cocktail of arsenic strong enough to kill 10 men. But this time, someone finally raised an eyebrow. When he died, doctors insisted on an autopsy. The results? Arsenic. A lot of arsenic. Like she didn't even try to be subtle. Nanny was arrested. And when they asked her about the string of mysterious deaths, she giggled. She confessed to 10 murders like she was talking about what she had for breakfast. Her words, I was just looking for the perfect man. Spoiler, none of them qualified. She was only tried for the murder of Samuel Dawes. And on May 17, 1955, she pleaded guilty. Life in prison, no parole. But Nanny, she still smiled. Wore her favorite dress, posed for photos. Honestly, she seemed delighted. She died in prison in 1965 of leukemia. Natural causes, ironically enough. So yeah, next time you visit grandma and she offers you a slice of pie, maybe ask what's in it. Because behind that sweet old lady smile, sometimes there's arsenic. And a little too much enthusiasm for romance novels. You've heard of serial killers who used guns, knives, poison. But what about neglect? That's what made Miyuki Ishikawa the most prolific serial killer in Japanese history. And she did it while wearing a midwife's uniform. Yep, the woman people trusted to deliver life was quietly letting it die. Miyuki was the director of Karabuki Maternity Hospital in post-war Tokyo. At the time, Japan was struggling. Poverty was everywhere, especially among young families. And if you were poor and had a baby, good luck. There were no social services, no welfare, no support, just another mouth to feed. Miyuki saw this as a problem, but instead of pushing for reform, she took a darker approach. She began killing babies, not by violence, but by doing nothing at all. No food, no care, just leaving them, letting them waste away in silence. She justified it by saying she was sparing them a life of suffering. Her husband, Takeshi Ishikawa, helped cover it up, and a doctor named Shiro Nakayama, he was in on it too, falsifying death certificates to make it all look natural. Because nothing says trusted medical professional like casually lying about baby corpses. For a while, nobody noticed. The system was broken, overwhelmed, and Miyuki was seen as this respected, if slightly cold, professional. That is, until 1948. 2 police officers from the Waseda precinct were poking around when they found 5 dead infants connected to the hospital. The cause of death? Not natural at all. And when investigators started digging deeper, well, let's just say they uncovered a horror show. 40 more infant bodies were found in the house of a local mortician. Another 30 were discovered hidden inside a temple. That's 75 babies. And that's just what they found. At trial, Miyuki and her crew didn't even try to deny. Instead, they argued they were doing society a favor, helping desperate families. They even tried to shift the blame onto their parents, because that's not messed up at all. Now, you'd think with a case this disturbing, the punishment would be severe, right? Wrong. Miyuki got 8 years in prison. Just 8. Her husband and the shady doctor got 4 each. And on appeal, all of their sentences were cut in half. Seriously. It caused a public outrage, and rightfully so. But something good, or at least less horrifying, came out of it. On June 24, 1949, Japan partially legalized abortion, largely as a response to this case. Because apparently it took a mass baby murder scandal for lawmakers to realize poor families needed options. Miyuki faded into obscurity after her release. No one knows exactly when or how she died. She just disappeared, like the lives she quietly took. So yeah, next time someone tells you midwives are all nurturing and gentle, remember, some of them might also be record-holding serial killers with a terrifying sense of mercy. And if a doctor ever offers to handle a paperwork for you, maybe double check what they're really signing. You know that one sweet old lady on your block? The one with a tidy garden, perfectly set hair, and a tray of cookies that often seem a little too generous? Yeah, sometimes she's a serial killer. Meet Dorothea Puente. Grandmotherly, polite, soft-spoken, and the landlady from hell. Her life of the crime started small. In the 70s, she was forging checks. Petty stuff, really. She got caught and did 6 months in jail. Then she popped up in a brothel in 1960. Got arrested again and spent another 90 days behind bars. After that, arrested for vagrancy. Another 90 days. You know, just casually collecting misdemeanor charges, like they were Pokemon. But then she cleaned up. For a while, she got a job as a nurse's aide, helping elderly and disabled people in their homes. Sweet, right? It was the perfect disguise, because Dorothea had plans. She eventually bought a big old house in Sacramento and turned it into a boarding house for the elderly and disabled. People who had no family, no one checking in, no one watching too closely. And that's when she went full horror movie villain. At first, she would drug her tenants, steal their social security checks, and forge their signatures. Classic scammer move. She got caught, served 3 years in prison, and got out, ready to start over. Spoiler, she didn't just start over, she escalated. Soon after her release, people started disappearing from her house. Elderly men and women just vanishing. And every time someone asked about them, Dorothea would smile, serve tea, and say something like, "Oh, they moved away, such a shame." Except they hadn't moved, they'd been buried. Police got involved after a social worker reported 2 missing boarders. When officers arrived, something felt off. The backyard smelled weird, so they brought shovels. What they dug up was a nightmare. The first body was just the beginning, then another and another, 7 in total, all buried right there in her backyard, beneath the garden and flower beds. You know, for that extra touch of horror movie irony, she was eventually charged with 9 murders, though it's believed she may have killed more. Former tenants vanished and were never found. Their paper trails end at Dorothea's door. At her trial, she played the sweet old lady card hard. Showed up in soft blouses, looked frail, clutched a Bible. The jury wasn't buying it. She was found guilty of 3 murders and sentenced to 2 life terms. Dorothea Puente died in prison in 2011 at the age of 82. Still calm, still quiet, still pretending she was just misunderstood. So yeah, if your landlady ever insists on cash payments and says, "Don't worry about the paperwork," maybe start worrying, because behind some white-laced curtains, there's a shovel waiting. Let me introduce you to Lavinia Fisher, a woman often called America's first female serial killer. Except, she may not have actually killed anyone. But don't worry, there's still robbery, poison, a haunted hotel, and a dramatic execution in a wedding dress. So yeah, it's still a ride. This story takes us back to the early 1800s. Outside Charleston, South Carolina, Lavinia and her husband John Fisher owned a place called the 6 Mile Wayfarer House, a cozy little inn for weary travelers, and allegedly a trap for the unlucky. Now, facts are fuzzy, the paper trail is thin, but the legends? Oh, the legends are juicy. According to the most popular version, men started disappearing after spending the night at the Fisher's Inn. Lavinia would welcome travelers in, offer them food, and pour them a nice cup of tea. How charming! Except the tea was poisoned. If the guest passed out, they'd allegedly fall through a trapdoor built into the bed and straight into the basement, where John would be waiting with a knife, or a noose, or just a grave already dug. The Fishers played innkeeper by day, murderers by night. Kind of like Sweeney Todd, but with more southern hospitality and fewer musical numbers. The local townsfolk eventually got suspicious, so a group of vigilantes showed up at the inn to confront them. They left behind a man named David Ross to keep an eye on things. Bad idea. That night, Ross was attacked by a gang of highwaymen and Lavinia herself, but he survived and ran to the police. Then there's John Peoples, a traveler who stopped by the inn looking for a bed. Lavinia gave him the infamous tea, but he hated tea. He was a picky drinker. He dumped it out while she wasn't looking and pretended to sleep. Later that night, he heard people sneaking into his room. He escaped, sprinted straight to the cops, and said, "Yeah, so I think the innkeepers are killing people." Police raided the inn and found remains in the basement, plus personal belongings of a bunch of missing men. Now for the version with more solid documentation. In this one, Lavinia and John ran the same inn, but they were part of a group of highway robbers, not murderers. They used the 6-mile Wayfarer house as a hideout, preying on travelers along the road. After a string of robberies, the police got involved, because commerce in Charleston was serious business, and highway robbery was basically messing with the city's cash flow. David Ross still shows up here, and yes, he still gets attacked by Lavinia and her gang. John Peoples still robbed, still traumatized, still very much over this whole charming countryside inn situation. No murders in this version, just some very violent theft. Either way, John and Lavinia were arrested, convinced of a highway robbery, which at the time was a capital offense, and sentenced to hang. Now here's where it gets extra theatrical. Back then, South Carolina law said you couldn't execute a married woman, so they hanged John Fisher first, making Lavinia legally a widow. Checkmate, loophole. Legend says that on the day of her execution, Lavinia wore her wedding dress and shouted to the crowd, "If any of you have a message for the devil, tell me. I'm about to meet him." Talking about a final mic drop. She was hanged on February 18, 1820, and with that, Lavinia Fisher walked off the gallows and into American folklore. So, was she a cold-blooded killer who poisoned travelers and dropped them into a murder basement? Or just a very stylish thief who got caught up in legend? Hard to say. But either way, she'll always be remembered as the innkeeper who definitely didn't want to book a room with. And if you ever find yourself in Charleston, South Carolina, maybe skip the charming old B&Bs with a lot of history. Because sometimes the past isn't just haunted, it's buried in the basement. And thank you for watching. If you like this video, make sure to check out this video right here. And I'll see you there. Bye!